And we are rolling on the 18th of May, where we are about to hear a wonderful debate on climate change. In fact, we're going to hear fact debate number 2, which the resolution says hurricanes and other extreme climate events, parentheses, a severe rise in sea levels, tornadoes, close parentheses, are imminent consequences of global warming. Speaking for the government, Shane and Christine. For the opposition, Abby and Dana. As that great film Listen to Me once said, let the debates begin. What is your name? Sydney will be timing and will be giving both hand and oral time signals.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Shane Young.
Hi, Shane.
Our topic today is hurricanes and other extreme climate events, a severe rise in sea levels, tornadoes, etc., are imminent consequences of global warming. This round should be judged based on a preponderance of meaningful evidence which supports either side of the debate on the aforementioned claim. The definitions that both groups have decided on are imminent, defined as about to take place, and global warming, defined as an increase in the Earth's average atmospheric temperature that causes corresponding changes in climate and that may result from the greenhouse effect. We, on the affirmative, must show that extreme climate events are predicted by reputable scientists to be imminent consequences of global warming by providing meaningful evidence that shows, number one, these extreme climate events are scientifically observable. They exist. Number two, these extreme climate events are scientifically observed as consequences of global warming. And number three, these extreme climate events are predicted to be imminent consequences of global warming. The opposition must show that extreme climate events are not predicted by reputable scientists to be imminent consequences of global warming by providing meaningful evidence that shows, number one, that existing extreme climate events are not scientifically observed as consequences of global warming. Number two, these existing extreme climate events are caused by other factors. And number three, extreme climate events are not imminent. We will be analyzing several aspects of climate change affecting severe climate events, and we have chosen to break up our topics in ways that make sense to group them together. The primary focus of my research is centered around the effects of climate change on the ocean. To start that off, according to a section of the IPCC's 2015 report, coastal systems are particularly sensitive to 3 key drivers related to climate change: sea level, ocean temperature, and ocean acidity, and they reported that with very high confidence. Therefore, these 3 sub-aspects of extreme climate events I've chosen to cover are rising sea levels around the world, the effects of warming ocean temperatures, specifically with how they impact hurricanes, and climate change relationship with ocean acidification. Now, when you think of coastal systems, what do you think of? An island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, only inhabited by a small number of native people, surrounded by bodies of water, or maybe a shanty sea town home to a small village of fishermen. While these places are certainly in danger of the effects of global warming, it may also surprise you to learn that 8 of the world's 10 largest cities contain highly populated areas that are near a coast, and thus considered coastal. And this includes our very own Los Angeles. So my first argument has to do with sea levels, and the fact that sea levels are rising. According to NASA's satellite measurements of sea level data updated in February 2017, sea levels have risen by 85.5 millimeters since 1993. Based on coastal tide gauge data, sea levels have risen nearly 200 millimeters since 1870. There are 2 main causes for this, and both of them are related to global warming: water from melting land ice and the expansion of water as it warms. The March 2017 report from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration declares the globally average temperatures of overland and ocean surfaces for March 2017 was the second highest for the month of March in the NOAA Global Temperature Dataset record, which dates back to 1880. The Antarctic sea ice extent for March was 580,000 square miles. That's 34.2% smaller below the 1981 to 2010 average. This was the smallest March Antarctic sea ice extent since records began in 1979, and 210,000 square miles smaller than the previous record set in 2006. A recent study published in the scientific journal The Cryosphere found that increasing melting of the Greenland ice sheet is due to increase in surface melt and meltwater runoff. The consequences of rising sea levels are imminent. Coastal systems and low-lying areas will increasingly experience adverse impacts such as submergence, coastal flooding, and coastal erosion due to a relative sea level rise, and that's from the IPCC. Now talking about hurricanes. Hurricanes are increasing in intensity. Although the relationship between rates of hurricane occurrence and global warming is contested, the relationship between rising sea surface temperatures and tropical cyclone intensity is established. A study published in the International Union for Conservation of Nature found that while ocean surface temperatures do not seem to have an effect on the increasing frequency of overall hurricane frequencies, they are predicted to increase the frequency of more intense hurricanes, those that are categories 3 or higher, by 25 to 30% for every degree Celsius increase in global warming. Similar data was obtained by a separate study published in the Journal of Advances in Modeling Earth Systems. How that relates to global warming, the heat content of the upper 700 meters of the global ocean is 120 times 1021 joules higher than in 1995. That data is from the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Hurricanes cause billions of dollars in damage every year. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration collected data on hurricanes from 1900 to 2005 and found specifically from the dollar estimates of the damage from all hurricanes that 85% of that damage was caused by hurricanes that were category 3 or higher. So we're really more concerned with these more intense hurricanes when we're talking about the dangerous and imminent effects of hurricanes. Now for ocean acidification, ocean pH levels are in fact decreasing. The ocean's pH has dropped to 8.1 from 8.2 over the past 2 centuries.
1 minute left.
This is caused by CO2 being absorbed by the ocean, where it is converted into carbonic acid, and which raises the acidity of the ocean. Ocean pH is varied on the paleo timescale, but the rate of acidification is measured to be 50 times faster than any rate observed previously. It is linked with global warming because, as I said, it occurs through CO2 being drawn in from the atmosphere. The ocean acts as a sink, carbon sink for CO2, which has the formation of carbonic acid has caused ocean acidification. So ocean acidification has imminent consequences because it is already disrupting the ability of marine organisms that rely on the higher basic concentrations in the ocean to form shells, and it also may be affecting reproductive problems in certain species. Acidification and warming of coastal waters will continue with significant negative consequences for coastal ecosystems. That was reported with high confidence by the IPCC. Thank you. I now stand open for cross-examination and points of clarification.
Thank you very much. Okay, stand close together, please. By the way, Sam and I were talking about this. The next speaker doesn't necessarily have to do the cross-act. You can flip it. So whatever you decided to do is fine, but it doesn't necessarily have to. Are you going to be the next speaker?
Yes.
Okay. If you plan to do it, do it. But I'm just saying for the future folks, this gives the person that's going to be the next speaker 3 minutes to prepare, which is some advantage to them.
Okay. So you're saying either of us could have cross-examined?
Yeah, either of you could do it. Okay, so just
I do have a couple clarifying questions and cross-examination questions for sure.
Great.
Okay. So both the World Wildlife Fund and a Times article based on the findings of the IPCC and the Nature Climate Change Journal say that sea levels rising causes increased global warming, not the other way around. If you'd like some information on this, the researchers found that as the pH of the oceans dropped, it would result in lower concentrations of sulfur and marine emissions of sulfur. Or if acidification decreases sulfur, it could cause an increase in the amount of solar energy reaching the surface, speeding up warming, which is exactly what the Nature Climate Study predicts. So basically, it's the opposite direction of what you're predicting.
Your response?
How do you
Yeah.
respond?
Yeah.
Just a clarification. What is so that sounded like ocean acidification, and then you were saying sea level rises cause an increase in the warming of temperatures
2 minutes.
Because of the increased sulfur.
from rising sea levels.
Acidification decreases emissions of sulfur, which could cause an increase in the amount of solar energy reaching the Earth's surface, speeding up the warming of the ocean.
Okay. I still don't quite see the relationship to rising sea levels. Yeah, I'm not quite sure I fully understand the link.
In your NOAA source about coastal systems, the chapter has updated knowledge on the impacts of climate change on the coastal systems, not in isolation, but also from the perspective of overexploitation and degradation that have been responsible for most of the historical changes. And for those of you that don't know, overexploitation is like overfishing and overhunting, and coastal degradation is the alteration or destruction of coastlines due to human activity. So how do you attribute this to global warming if they were linked together?
Right. Well, still according to the IPCC, we see that they've still predicted these events to occur, and they're all related. The rising sea levels, the warming ocean temperatures, and ocean acidification. And so while there definitely may be other factors at play,
30 seconds.
at least from what I found that all those factors were interlinked and were causing a majority.
I agree. It was just the source you used said that they didn't test them independently, but rather together, so it's hard to determine what came from what. Lastly, you concede that the relationship between hurricane occurrence and global warming is not well understood, and you attempt to justify your side by saying that there's more intense hurricanes, not necessarily more frequency. Can I ask the question?
Okay, answer what she said so far, and then we'll be. She said you.
Well, I haven't really asked the question.
I got it. She said you drew a distinction between the intensity and frequency. Your response.
I did, in fact, draw that.
Okay, well that's pretty significant because you're admit. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, the chair will now recognize the leader of the opposition for her opposition speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length.
So Shane already went through our definitions and our resolutional analysis, so I'll begin with criterion. The criteria for assessing truth will be a preponderance of evidence and quality of evidence. The winner of the debate will be judged based on the more convincing evidence and its probable truth or accuracy, and not on the amount of evidence. Because this is a fact debate, the evidence for this debate should prove beyond a reasonable doubt that hurricanes and other extreme climate events are imminent consequences of global warming met by the affirmative. The problem is that people will be more likely to work on a resolution for global warming if they know the consequences from it. It is important to find the truth in this issue and share that with the public so they are not left with questions. If global warming is caused by humans, and if global warming causes extreme climate events, then humans are causing extreme climate events, thereby causing more damage to their world. People need to know that if they are the reason behind floods, droughts, and other extreme climate events. As Mike Comm of King's College London put it, there remain outstanding political dangers and obstacles for extreme weather attribution if it is to be used, as some claim it can and should be, for guiding climate adaptation investments. My first observation was that there has been a rise in the number of tornadoes over the last 50 years. However, I argue that advances in reporting procedures and population growth are the cause of increased tornado counts. Not all the data presented is accurate. For a reference, tornadoes are measured on a Fujita tornado damage scale, with 0 being the least damaging and 5 being the most damaging, and tornadoes of level 3 and above are considered severely damaging. A study conducted at the University of Belgrade in Serbia about the effect of global warming on tornadoes in the United States found that there has been a statistically significant decrease at an average rate of 0.44 tornadoes per year in the 1954 to 2012 period of the F3 category, so the more damaging ones. The total number of tornadoes reported has increased tenfold during the last 50 years, which is believed to be the consequence of meteorological and non-meteorological factors. The increase is a cause of better observations and advanced reporting procedures. Non-meteorological factors include population growth and migrations, the coming of mobile phones, development of the National Weather Service network of tornado spotters, and local media. Additionally, in The Skeptical Environmentalist, Bjorn Lundberg says that for tropical and extratropical storms, intensity and frequency are dominated by interdecadal to multi-decadal variations with no long-term trends evident. Moreover, no systematic changes in the frequency of tornadoes, thunder days, or hail are evident in the limited areas analyzed. Lundberg also mentions that one of the main GCM modelers said that there are a number of statements in informal writings that are not supported by climate science or projections with high-quality climate models. Some of these statements may appear to be physically plausible, but the evidence for their validity is weak, and some are just wrong. Therefore, the GCM modelers themselves don't even think that the models are accurate. I also observed that there has been a substantial increase in hurricane activity since the 1980s. However, researchers have concluded that some extreme weather events remain unaffected by CO2-induced global warming, and there is not enough data to support the claim that CO2 was the cause of these extreme weather events. We agree that there has been a substantial increase in most measures of Atlantic hurricane activity since the 1980s. However, these measures include intensity, frequency, and duration, as well as the number of strongest Category 4 and 5 storms. The ability to assess long-term trends in hurricane activity is limited by the available data. The historic record of Atlantic hurricanes dates back to the mid-1800s and indicates other decades of high activity. However, there is considerable uncertainty in the record prior to the satellite era, which was the early 1970s. And the further back in time one goes, the more uncertain the record becomes. According to Craig D. Idso, the current chairman of the board of the Center for the Study of Carbon Dioxide and Global Change, there are 3 steps to identifying a CO2 influence on extreme weather events. 1, pertinent data must be obtained across a sufficiently long period of time. 2, the natural variability of the parameters involved must be appropriately analyzed. And 3, the influence of all non-CO2-driven variables that might have an impact on extreme weather must be determined and removed from observable trends, which is why I was asking Shane, because they were tested together. Idso concludes that when such steps are followed, however, as illustrated by the large literature that he found, it is nearly impossible to not conclude that extreme weather events remain unaffected by CO2. It's a lot of double negatives, but basically it's not affected by CO2, at least in the manner projected by the models. Quite to the contrary, observational data often indicate just the opposite, that many types of extreme weather events have become less frequent and less severe as the air's temperature and CO2 concentration increased over the past half-century or more. Indeed, the occurrence of any extreme event not previously observed within living memory or since records began immediately becomes a candidate for attribution to global warming. A combined approach is often deemed necessary given the limitations imposed on observational approaches by the shortness and inaccuracies of historical records and on modeling approaches by known and unknown model eras. I also observed that there has been an increase in extreme weather, but not all increases in extreme weather are accompanied by global warming because they are not accompanied by higher temperatures.
1 minute.
Research conducted at the University of Montpellier in the Geosciences Department found that 2 periods of most frequent superstorm strikes in the Aigues-Mortes Gulf coincide with 2 of the coldest periods in Europe during the late Holocene. As a result, the authors state that extreme storm events are associated with a large cooling of Europe, and they calculate that the risk of such storms occurring during that cool period was higher than today by a factor of 10. And since we're talking about global warming, cooling isn't really a factor. People make confident claims that extreme climate events are a result of global warming, implying that extreme climate events have increased since global warming began. But in the article we read for class about the low level of extreme climate events, Mark Moreno, a political aide for Rush Limbaugh, said that it is not just droughts that are at near record levels. On almost every measure of extreme weather, the data is not cooperating with the claims of the climate change campaigners. Tornadoes, floods, droughts, and hurricanes are failing to fit in with the global warming narrative. I now open for cross-examination and points of clarification.
Thank you. Chair will now hear a cross-examination, not to exceed 3 minutes in length. Please stand close together. Thank you. You're tall.
And we're short.
Yeah, wear high heels. You guys stand over that way. Move over that way. Yeah, good. No, thank you. Perfect. Good.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Go. Starting off with tornadoes, would you say that a large quantity of tornadoes form during thunderstorms?
I'm not sure.
There's a lot of links between the two.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
Okay, fair enough. So going off of that, the conditions for tornadoes, for thunderstorms that require to form, would you agree that thunderstorms require warm air conditions to form?
Again, I gotta take your word for that.
Okay, fair enough. So, I guess this is entirely based off my word, but therefore, based on the previous logic, do you believe it is plausible that global warming may be indirectly causing tornado formation by providing the conditions necessary for thunderstorm formation and tornadoes by extension, as was a link found by a study posted by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences?
I do believe that's definitely possible, but as I said, the increased tornado counts are partly at least due to our better reporting procedures, so it's hard to say, if you're saying indirect link, what actually caused it.
Fair enough. So going back to one of the main sources you use, would you consider your source of Mr. Idzo of the Center for the Study of Carbon Dioxide and Global Change to be a credible and unbiased one?
From what I read, yes.
So would you be surprised to learn that his organization refuses to disclose their funding, but a series of leaked tax documents have revealed that they have received at least $75,000 in support from ExxonMobil? And did you know that in the early 2000s, Mr. Idzo was the director of environmental science at Peabody Energy, which is the world's largest privately owned coal company?
1 minute.
I'm sure that there is money behind this industry. I don't think Al Gore is doing it for free either.
Fair enough. Going back to the droughts, which you touched on at the end. So do you think it's fair to say that you're confident that global warming does not affect the occurrence or severity of droughts in the United States?
It could definitely have a link, but I don't think that it's an imminent consequence that we can prove right now.
Okay. Well, what about the importance of building a large snowpack, specifically in the Sierra Nevadas, such as a claim in a study conducted by Climate Central, which said that rising atmospheric temperatures not only prevent the snowpack from forming as large due to increased precipitation falling as rain rather than snow, but also the snowpack melting earlier in the season, leaving the soil much drier during the later months of the year?
You can answer briefly.
I did not address the snowpack, so I'm not exactly sure the data on that, so I don't know how to answer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it's now time to hear the deputy member of the government for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes in length. Here.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. As Shane introduced during his speech, we are here to argue that extreme climate events are imminent consequences of global warming. To reiterate, we prove our case if we are able to provide meaningful evidence that shows, 1, these extreme climate events are scientifically observable, they exist. 2, these extreme climate events are scientifically observed as consequences of global warming. And 3, these extreme climate events are predicted to be imminent consequences of global warming. Shane has provided you with some examples, and I will continue by providing evidence that shows that extreme climate events concerning precipitation patterns, tornadoes, and extreme temperatures are also imminent consequences of global warming. Number 1, there are observed changes in extreme precipitation-related climate events, including extreme one-day precipitation events, floods globally. For example, the EPA reports that total annual precipitation has increased globally in the past century. They also report that in recent years, a larger percentage of precipitation has come in the form of intense single-day events. In fact, 9 of the top 10 years for extreme one-day precipitation events have occurred since 1990. The U.S. Global Change Research Program also notes that these heavy downpours are increasing nationally, especially over the last 3 to 5 decades. Also, according to the EPA, floods are becoming larger and more frequent across the U.S., and they generally coincide with increases and decreases in the frequency of heavy rainfall events. So we're obviously seeing the impact of these extreme precipitation events right now, but are they the consequences of global warming? I argue yes, as the following studies have established the link between the two. In 2013, Kenneth Kunkel from the North Carolina Institute of Climatic Studies found that changes in extreme precipitation during the past several decades is linked to human-caused changes in atmospheric composition. This is because the water-holding capacity of the atmosphere has increased in response to human-induced warming from fossil fuel emissions, allowing for more and heavier precipitation. Multiple studies cite this phenomenon as the cause of the changes in precipitation patterns I mentioned before, including Dr. Thomas C. Peterson of Colorado State University, who concludes that this change in atmospheric water capacity increases the chance for extreme one-day precipitation events and therefore flooding events. Scientists like Dr. Thomas Carla expect that future greenhouse gas increases will further increase the moisture content of the atmosphere, thus creating an even higher frequency of extreme precipitation events. The U.S. Global Change Research Program also predicts an increase in the frequency and intensity of these precipitation events for all U.S. regions. Therefore, these observed changes and predictions of these extreme precipitation events are consequences of global warming. Number 2, tornadoes. Admittedly, how global warming might affect tornadoes remains an open scientific question. However, the recent scientific advances in methodology have given some new insight to the possible relationship. A study by Dr. Cameron C. Lee from Kent State University utilized an entirely different approach to project the changes in frequency and seasonality of tornado environments due to global warming. She found that the number of strong tornado days will increase anywhere from 3.8 to 12.7% by the 2090s, in addition to the tornado season shifting earlier in the year. This seasonality shift matches current observations of the tornado season, in which Dr. Jed A. Long of the University of St. Andrews demonstrates that peak tornado activity has shifted 7 days earlier in the year over the past 6 decades. Some scientists claim that societal exposure to tornadoes due to population increase overshadows the danger of potential global warming alterations to tornadoes. However, this year, Dr. Stephen M. Strader of Villanova University predicted that the combination of both scenarios would lead to a 3-fold increase in median annual tornado impact and disaster potential from 2010 to 2100. Despite the fact tornadoes and global warming remain an open question, new methods to study the link are currently being tested and developed, leading to new discoveries like ones I just mentioned, which established a connection between the two. If this is a completely closed issue, there would be no if this is a completely closed issue that there is no contention over whether there is a link between global warming and tornadoes, scientists would not be actively researching this topic like they are now. Number 3, extreme temperatures. Finally, there are observed changes in extreme temperature climate events, including record-breaking high temperatures, heat waves, and their consequences like wildfires. The EPA notes that since the 1970s, record-setting highs have become more common than record-setting lows in the United States. And the most recent decade has had twice as many record highs as record lows. Dr. John Walsh of the University of Illinois found that heat waves have generally become more frequent across the U.S. in recent decades, with western regions setting record numbers during the last decade. To top it off, a combination of these extreme temperature events, coupled with drought conditions, leads to a larger wildfire and longer fire season. And for those of you who have grown up in California, you know how devastating this can be. I argue that these extreme weather events are consequences of global warming. Dr. J.E. Bell of the U.S. Global Change Research Program found that increasing concentrations of greenhouse gases lead to an increase in both average and extreme temperatures. In 2014, a study led by research meteorologist Thomas R. Netson found that record-breaking highs in Australia and the western tropical Pacific were a result of anthropogenic forcing to an observed long-term warming trend. In fact, he found that the mean highs in those regions regions for 2013 were completely outside the distributions of modeled natural variability, meaning that the extreme temperatures were consequences of the anthropogenic global warming detected. In addition, a large-scale project spanning 22 studies of extreme climate events in 2014, led by Dr. Thomas C. Peterson, concluded, and I quote, "The 9 separate analyses of extreme heat events overwhelmingly showed that human-caused climate change is having an influence. In some cases, events have become as much as 10 times more likely due to current cumulative effects on human-induced global warming." These studies illustrate the scientific consensus that extreme temperature events are consequences of global warming, and the consequences only get worse. Scientists like Dr. John Walsh say that heat waves everywhere are projected to become more intense. This has severe implications for human health. Dr. J.E. Bell expects these extreme temperature events to lead to an increase in death and illnesses from heat, particularly for vulnerable communities such as children, the elderly, and economically disadvantaged groups. Shane and I have demonstrated 6 different extreme climate events that are current observable phenomenon that have been scientifically demonstrated to be consequences of global warming. As global warming increases in the future, we must adhere to scientists' predictions that the consequences of these climate events will also increase in order to prepare to face them the best we can. Sorry for my shaky voice.
I now stand.
I now stand for cross-examination and...
Thank you, Christine.
First off, I want to start by saying great job with your research. My first question is, in your examination of studies establishing the relationship between extreme precipitation events and global warming, where you claim the changes in extreme precipitation are due to human-caused activity, are you aware of the footnote at the bottom of the very first page that reads, "The observed changes and losses represent a combination of the effects of both physical climate and socioeconomic variability, and it is difficult to attribute any of these changes to climate." And this is in relation to your storm-related precipitation and other extreme events. So what do you have to say in response to this?
You said you can attribute it to climate?
Yes.
Let's see. I'm not aware of the footnote.
Look at the judges, not at her. You're trying to persuade us. Yeah.
I wasn't aware of the footnote, so I have to take your word for it. And yeah, I guess I just have to take your word for it.
You also discussed that there will be a 3-fold increase in median annual tornado impact magnitude and disaster potential from 2010 to 2100. So the statement from this article is as follows: while changes in societal exposure are projected to overshadow potential climate change-driven alterations in tornado risk, the combination of both an increase in risk and exposure may lead to a 3-fold increase in median annual tornado impact magnitude and disaster potential from 2010 to 2100. So isn't this journal actually suggesting that societal exposure and the underlying human-built vulnerabilities to storms is what's going to make the impact magnitude and disaster potential increase so much? And he even says that basically risks from the way society is structured and it's actually greater in terms of tornado impact magnitude and disaster potential compared to the suggested potential effects from climate change on tornado risk. So how do you think this supports your argument?
Well, I was saying that I admitted that this is still an open scientific argument, but the fact that scientists are still trying to find the link and have found support that there is a link, I think adds to our argument.
1 minute.
Let's see. So the fact that, sorry, I'm trying to remember. I think the fact that there is this established link that they're suggesting, even though that they're suggesting that human-caused, sorry.
Do you mind if I move on to my next question? Okay. So in your examination of flooding, you mentioned in your argument at the EPA that floods have become larger and more frequent. However, the site that you used to gather this information says that the flooding is increasing it's increasing and decreasing in the frequency and magnitude of river flood events, and they vary by region. So they've become generally larger across the Northeast and the Midwest and smaller in the West, Southern Appalachia, and Northern Michigan. So how can you generalize that floods are becoming larger and more frequent?
Would you like me to answer?
Answer the question.
I think the fact that we're debating a global warming, this is a global issue, so you have to look at the studies across the globe, and that's showing that overall, globally, the rates of floods are increasing. And while regionally they may not be in certain areas, it's a global phenomenon that we're debating today.
Thank you. Now, time for the chair to hear from the deputy member of the opposition.
So I'm not going to repeat everything Abby said because I have a lot of information that I want to get through. So basically, the first contention or observation is that global warming is causing a significant increase in hurricanes and other storms globally. My assertion is that El Nino and La Nina events are responsible for climate variability and hurricanes increases regionally. So according to the National Drought Mitigation Center, El Nino is the #1 driver of climate variability and is known to strongly influence risks of droughts, hurricanes, and floods in different parts of the world. And every few years there's an event called El Nino which causes water temperature to actually become warmer. And this is part of the ENSO cycle, which stands for El Nino Southern Oscillation. So La Nina is the other extreme of the ENSO cycle and makes the waters colder during a given period of time. And most storms occur as a result of colliding air masses at different temperatures. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says that when there's an El Nino event, it favors more hurricane activity within the central and eastern Pacific basins, and when there's a La Nina event, it favors hurricanes in the Atlantic basin. So basically, a nonprofit organization in Canada claimed that the climate models almost unanimously project that there will be an increase in the vertical wind shear during the hurricane season, which also acts to inhibit tropical cyclone formation. So then there's this other thing that comes into play that's called the Atlantic Multidecadal Oscillation, the AMO, which also influences hurricane activity. So according to the NOAA, the AMO is a climate cycle that produces long-term changes in the ocean that causes colder or warmer phases, and they can last from 20 to 40 years. And that we've been in a warmer period since somewhere around the 1990s. So tree rings and ice cores show that this has been occurring for at least the last millennium, far longer than any man-made global warming. So it makes sense that more hurricanes would occur because of this warmer period that we're in as a result of the AMO cycle. So my next contention is that the trends that are being talked about, that we're having an increase in hurricanes or that we're going to have an increase in hurricanes and other kinds of climate events, they're not verifiable at this point because they've not been observed for a long enough time. And the models cannot accurately predict our climate's future. So Craig D. Itzo, the current chairman of the Center for the Study of Carbon Dioxide and Global Change, demonstrates how from 73 models that were made based on determining global temperature for the past 3 decades, they all failed to correctly predict this. So how can we expect simulations of extreme weather events centuries into the future, which are a lot more complex than predicting global temperature, to be accurate? So even with the development in our technology, our ability to predict these extreme weather events, which is far more difficult than global temperature, is analogous to the amount of technology we had to complete a far more simple computation in the past. It so says it is intrinsically much more difficult to simulate extreme weather events, which operate within much smaller spatial and temporal domains, than it is to simulate global temperature. NASA describes that scientists don't know exactly how or why hurricanes form, but they do know that the 2 main ingredients are necessary, that are warm water and winds that don't change much in speed or direction as they go higher in the atmosphere. So if scientists don't know exactly how a hurricane forms, how can they be sure that global warming is causing them? Similarly, in another journal, scientists relate that both observational and modeling approaches are taken to the problem. A combined approach is often deemed necessary given the limitations imposed on observational approaches by the shortness and inaccuracies of historical records, and on modeling approaches by known and unknown model errors. So basically they have to use a bunch of different techniques all together in order to try and even simulate these kinds of conditions, because that's how behind we are in technology. Itzo also says that the only way we can truly be accurate is through observation, which we haven't had enough time to, develop this trend. So Time magazine wrote, based on the hurricane season, that a long time ago they said, it's been quiet this hurricane season, too quiet. Back in May, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration predicted a very active tropical storm season, one with between 7 and 11 hurricanes, and the agency kept lowering that number because the hurricanes weren't happening as they predicted. So I want to bring up another kind of analogy in this sense, is that we used to just call it global warming because scientists thought that the Earth was warming, but now it's changed to climate change. So there's this constant backpedaling of information because we're really not sure. And to make that kind of assertion based on that the hurricane, that we're going to have X amount of hurricanes, even though we can't kind of predict that kind of knowledge, is not responsible. So my third observation is that storms are not actually becoming more intense, but damages have become more severe because we're significantly richer than we've been in the past. And there's been an increase in population in coastal areas. So growing insuring and infrastructure repair costs, particularly in coastal areas, are sometimes claimed to be the result of these increasing frequencies in the severity of the storms. But in reality, they're just a function of increasing population density and escalating development and really a lot more media reporting. So in The Skeptical Environmentalist, Bjorn Lomborg discusses the cost of damages in the past. And he says that damages in the 90s was recorded as 5 times more than in the past. And he mentions that if we're comparing the damages over time, we also have to compare the patterns in like demographics as well as like economic prosperity. So there are twice as many people today as in 1960, and each is more than twice as rich. Most probably more than doubled their physical wealth, and many have migrated to low-lying and coastal risk-prone areas. And to illustrate his point, he talks about how in the U.S. there are 2 coastal South Florida counties, Dade and Broward, and they're home to more people than the number of people who lived in 1930 in all of the 109 coastal counties stretching from Texas through Virginia, all along the Gulf and Atlantic coasts. So the Florida coastal population has increased more than 50-fold. So it's just pointing out the fact that we are looking at these costs of damages and the amount of damages and thinking that this is as a result of increasing frequencies of storms and extreme weather events, but really we're just a lot richer and we've developed a lot more and moving to different coastal cities, so we're a lot more risk prone for them. Also, media coverage has a big hand in trying to get the public to believe that global warming is causing all of these issues. Craig D. Itzo says, given such its findings, it would appear that man may indeed have been responsible for the majority of enhanced flooding of the rivers in Mississippi over the past century or so, but not the way suggested by the IPCC. So the question that needs addressing by the region's inhabitants, therefore, has nothing to do with CO2, but everything has to do with how to balance the local benefits of river engineering against the potential for large-scale flood magnifications. So the problem really rests in the infrastructure of Mississippi or wherever the rivers are, rather than the actual floods. Also, there's information from James L. Payne that says for the past 1,300 years, long before the debate of global warming, there have been serious changes in river levels and flow rates of the Nile River. Similar changes could continue into the future, but they'd be independent of the atmospheric CO2 concentration. I now am open to cross-examination and points of clarification.
Great. Thank you, Dana.
So, according to Dr. John Walsh and the rest of the U.S. Global Change Research Program, they agree with you that natural variations in climate include the effects of cycles such as El Nino, La Nina, and other ocean cycles, the 11-year sunspot cycle, and other changes in energy from the sun, and the effects of volcanic eruptions. However, they state that changes in climate and its events at the global scale observed over the past 50 years are far larger than can be accounted for by this natural variability. If it's not natural variability, what would you say accounts for this gap?
If it's not natural variability?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, though. They don't have enough information on trends from the past to know that this couldn't be from natural variability.
But they state that changes in climate and its events at the global scale observed over the past 50 years are far larger than can be accounted for by this natural variability.
Right, but as I said before, also the AMO, like, we've been in a warming period for so long now, and these things are happening as a result of that. So maybe, like, trends like you said that in the past 50 years, what?
That these natural variations can't account for all the change that has been observed.
Do you have any examples of that change?
We can just move on. So you cite Craig D. Itzo, the current chairman of the Center of the Study of Carbon Dioxide and Global Change, as your source for calling into question the validity of climate event models. We have chosen to cite the U.S. Global Change Research Group, a coalition of more than 300 experts from accredited organizations like the University of Illinois, Texas Tech, NASA, and the National Climate Data Center, who use these models in their National Climate Assessment Report, which is peer-reviewed by the public experts, federal agencies, and a panel of the National Academy of Sciences. Why should we choose to trust Craig D. Itzo over the U.S. Global Change Research Group?
I think it's important to get different opinions from other people and to take into account those opinions instead of discrediting them right off the bat just because they're not from some university or something like that. So I think that it's important to take that into account and think that not just because they're from some university, that doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to analyze this kind of information as well.
Were you aware that Craig D. Itzo used to work for Peabody Energy, the largest private sector coal company in the world, or that its Center for the Study of Carbon Dioxide and Global Change has accepted tens of thousands of dollars in donations from ExxonMobil?
No, I wasn't aware of that, but like Abby said, I think that not everyone acts in their own self-interest, so I think that, everyone has some kind of stake in something in a little bit. So
30 seconds.
The definition of a conflict of interest is a situation in which a person is in a position to derive personal benefit from actions or decisions made in their official capacity. Can you tell me how this isn't a conflict of interest?
how it's not a conflict of interest? Well, don't you think that Al Gore is getting donations from governmental and environmental organizations that want to? You don't think that he's getting?
We didn't cite Al
donations
Gore
as
in
well?
our briefs, though.
Fair enough.
You cite Friends of Science as another source multiple times, but they also
Time.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's all give them a round of applause for a very spirited, constructive period of argumentation. And now it's time for that famous 4 steps of refutation, which I hope we'll hear from first the leader of the government for a refutation period not to exceed 3 minutes in length.
Alrighty. The opposition states that the increasing damages monetarily over the years due to hurricanes are due to population and economic growth in coastal areas rather than the intensity of the hurricanes themselves. We agree that increasingly more people are moving to these coastal areas and that the wealth of these areas is rising. But we believe this only proves how the effects of these hurricanes will continue rising as well. Especially because an estimated 85% of the damage from that study I cited earlier is caused by intense hurricanes, which we have proven to be increasing due to global warming. In other words, it's a combination of both, with the primary one we believe to be from intense hurricanes. Also, I'd like to go back to that distinction I drew about increasing hurricanes in general, or the evidence for the decreasing of the total amount of hurricanes, but the evidence for the increasing amount of intense hurricanes, categories 3 and above.
2 minutes.
So I drew that distinction because the debate is not about global warming increasing the number of these events. It's about whether these extreme events are linked to global warming, whether they're imminent consequences of global warming. We don't have to prove a net increase, we just have to prove a relationship between the two, which we have through our data from multiple studies. The opposition has attempted to largely discredit anthropogenic global warming CO2's effects on extreme climate events. However, most of this is based off data from Craig Deed, so I won't go into his conflicts of interest again, but I will say while there are certainly biases on both sides, I would argue that having ties to the largest coal mining company in the world and taking money from ExxonMobil is one of the more egregious biases. Especially when their official stance was not willing to disclose their tax revenue originally, or their donations originally, suggests that perhaps he sees the conflict of interest as well. I've proven the time sensitivity of acting on what we do know about climate events and climate change, instead of hanging on for an undeniable link. These are extremely complicated events, and thus we must act on what we know. What we know is extreme climate events are increasing, either in number or intensity, and that global warming is linked with the occurrence of these events. These events are having and will continue to have severe effects on the global climate if the current and projected trends continue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shane. I'll repeat again. We're looking for 4 steps of refutation. They are: he said, I disagree, because, therefore, the resolution is true or not true. Thank you.
Okay, since Shane wanted to go back to that relationship between hurricane occurrence and them increasing in the increase in not frequency but intensity, I will go back as well because I didn't get to finish my point in counter-examination. But the site that was used went back to, I believe, 1993, and we have been in a warming period of the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation since the 1980s, because they're 20 to 40-year periods, so that goes back to the 1990s. So any of this increased intensity of the hurricanes could be attributed to the AMO. In Shane's discussion of the consequences of hurricanes, he discussed the estimated projection of damages in the coming decades. The article he used said, unless action is taken to address the growing concentration of people and properties in coastal areas where hurricanes strike, damage will increase, and by a great deal, as more and wealthier people increasingly inhabit these coastal locations. So he believes that it's possibly a link of both the increasing amount of people and the global warming, but I don't think any of the evidence used actually proves that it could be solely global warming because they were never tested independently. A lot of these events they both said were increasing, but didn't exactly prove a direct correlation from global warming. All of you have seen firsthand how extreme climate events can be misattributed to global warming. Take an Inconvenient Truth, for example. Bjorn Lundberg wrote an article called Inconvenient Truths for Al Gore, where he concluded if all hurricanes hit the U.S. with today's demographics, the biggest damage would not have been caused by Katrina but by a hurricane in 1926. Allowing for changes in the number of people and their wealth, flood losses have actually decreased slightly. The movie invites viewers to conclude that global warming caused Hurricane Katrina, but with Gore claiming that the warm Caribbean waters made the storm, by Gore claiming that it made the storm stronger. But when Katrina made landfall, it was not a Category 5 hurricane, it was a milder hurricane, only Category 3. In fact, there is no scientific consensus that global warming makes hurricanes more destructive, as both Gore and Shane argued.
30 seconds.
We do not believe that the government has met their burden of proof. As a reminder, the government had to prove that hurricanes and other extreme events exist, hurricanes and other extreme events are caused by global warming, and hurricanes and other extreme events are imminent. Shane argues what the imminent consequences of 3 types of extreme climate events are, rather than that these extreme climate events are imminent consequences of global warming. While they do show that many extreme climate events are increasing, they do not accurately show that these climate events are a consequence of global warming.
Thank you. We will now hear from the deputy member of the government who will attempt to engage in 4 steps of refutation. They said, I disagree because, therefore.
So they say El Nino and La Nina events are responsible for climate variability and hurricane increases regionally. We disagree because global warming is a global issue, and this topic must be observed from a global perspective as well. According to Dr. John Walsh and the rest of the U.S. Global Change Research Program, changes in climate at the global scale observed over the past 50 years are far larger than can be accounted for by natural variability. Therefore, global warming is also responsible for climate variability and hurricane increases. They asked, how can we expect simulations of extreme weather events centuries into the future, which are a lot more complex than predicting temperatures, to be accurate? We disagree with the framing of this argument because our topic is to debate whether these climate events are imminent consequences of global warming, meaning observing predictions about what is about to happen. We aren't looking centuries into the future, but within a shorter time frame, by looking at current observable extreme climate events, their current established relationship to global warming, and scientists' imminent predictions based off of extending this observed data. The furthest prediction I have cited is only until the year 2100, which may as well be during our children's lifetimes. Therefore, the opposition's argument is outside the scope of this debate since we are focusing on imminency. They say storms are not actually becoming more intense, but damages have been more severe because there has been an increase in population in coastal areas. We agree that there has been an increase in population in regions affected by extreme climate events. However, we disagree in the sentiment that this means these damages are not a consequence from global warming. Our prompt does not ask us to debate on what causes the most damage, but rather if these climate events that cause the damages in the first place are a consequence of global warming. And we have established that they are. Therefore, we believe this population growth in at-risk environments just proves there's even more reason to be concerned about the consequences of global warming on extreme climate events because more civilian lives are at stake. They say that media coverage has a big hand in trying to get the public to believe that global warming is causing all of these issues, citing the example of the media's focus on global warming effects on the flooding of the Mississippi River over the past century or so, while the real question should be addressing infrastructure. We disagree because we believe that the media is accurately reporting these incidents by reporting on the cause of the event in the first place, rather than questioning on how the questioning how to handle the event. In our case, we have shown that scientists have detected large-scale trends indicating that extreme precipitation events are becoming more likely as temperatures warm in response to increasing amounts of greenhouse gases in the air. Thus, we argue that the cause of Mississippi flooding is, in fact, global warming, since the extreme precipitation that kickstarts the flooding is a consequence of the increasing atmospheric temperature. Therefore, yes, we should be questioning our infrastructure's ability to handle massive amounts of precipitation, but we should also be channeling our energy into the root of the problem to begin with, global warming. It is better to solve the problem at its root instead of dealing with the aftermath of its consequences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Give me just a moment, please. Okay, the chair will now hear from the deputy member of the opposition for a four-step refutation process. They said I disagree because, therefore, the resolution's not true. Thank you.
So the government speaks of increases of intensity or increases in general of extreme climate events. I disagree because they have no clear evidence that this is actually due to climate change, which is what this entire debate is about. They constantly speak about how this is happening, but they don't have any clear evidence to attribute this to global warming in general. The article, Christine said that, when Christine talked about tornadoes, she discussed that there would be an increase in the annual tornado impact magnitude and disaster potential. The article that she used on tornadoes not only refutes her own argument, but shows further that more precautionary steps need to be taken in order to keep people safe from these events as a result of the societies they live in. Rather than blaming the tornadoes and destruction on climate change, we should be focusing on how to give those at risk for tornadoes more effective strategies for less damage. The government has the burden of proof that they need to show that this is from global warming and not from...
2 minutes left. Yeah.
So they also use John Walsh as a source in their argument. But John Walsh says himself that further back in time we go to observe these trends, the more uncertain the record becomes. So how can we be sure in general that the record is showing an increased trend in intensity or in these extreme events in general? Also, if they're based on these, Christine said that these, in my cross-examination it was brought up that these cannot be due to natural variations. But if those kinds of graphs and information are based on periods where we are in an AMO, it clearly looks like it can't be due to natural variations because AMO causes a severe spike from 20 to 40 years. So if she's saying 50 years ago that apparently we didn't have nearly as many, that 20 to 40 year time span can give us that many more extreme climate events. Also, I think it's important not to be swayed by the media with regards to identifying these extreme climate events as products of global warming, because then we're attributing the problem to something that's not really causing it. She refuted my article in Time about how, she refuted the idea that this is due to destruction rather than actual severity and damages and whatnot. But Time actually shows that the media has portrayed badly what is a global warming event and has been very quick to label what is a climate event and says, oh, that's due to global warming, instead of actually just saying that it's happening or it's due to something else that's causing it. So, in conclusion, I don't think that they met their burden of proof in proving that the global warming does in fact cause these extreme climate events.
Thank you. I invite the debaters to cross the House, shake hands, and congratulate their opponents on a job well done. And now we turn to the judges. Oh, I'm bad. Okay. How do I do this? I go message. I go, sorry, I can't talk right now, and then I turn this off. Okay.
You got a lot of notes there.
Okay. This looks good.
Oh, you want some?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Would you collect them for me?
Gladly.
And I will change the battery.
Everyone else done?
Yes.